Preston Vaughn walked out of the Lakewood Federal Credit Union boardroom on a Tuesday morning in February, carrying a cardboard box with his framed Wharton certificate sitting on top. The board had voted 9-2 to remove him. 214 members had been sent foreclosure notices on loans they were paying in full. 3 families had already lost their homes. A federal examination was open in 2 regulatory agencies, and the Iowa Attorney General had opened a parallel file. I was the one who wrote the first letter to the NCUA. I was the one who built the credit union's loan servicing system from the ground up, starting in the summer of 2003. I was also the man Preston Vaughn had retired in front of a misspelled sheet cake 5 months earlier. Let me tell you how a Wharton MBA from Philadelphia managed to destroy a farm country credit union that had survived every recession since 1952, and how a retired programmer with an air-gapped server in his basement proved every single line of it. My name is Howard Neumann. Most people in Lakewood call me Howie. I'm 63 years old. I worked at Lakewood Federal Credit Union for 37 years, from the fall of 1988 until the end of September 2025, when I was walked out the back door under the gentle, terrible cover of a retirement party. I started as a teller. I ended as the only man alive who understood the computer system that knew who owed what to whom. Everything that happened afterward happened because the people who forced me out didn't understand what they were inheriting. They thought they were inheriting a database. They were inheriting 28 years of quiet promises made to people who trusted the building with their homes. I want to tell you about Agnes Varley first, because she was the first one who called me. Agnes is 81. Her husband, Paul, died in the spring of 2021. Paul and Agnes took out a mortgage from Lakewood FCU in the summer of 1974 to build a farmhouse on a 90-acre parcel north of town. They paid that mortgage on time for 26 years and then refinanced it through us again in the year 2000 to put a new roof on the barn and a new well on the property. They kept paying. They never missed a payment. Paul worked at the John Deere contract plant in Marshalltown for 31 years. Agnes taught 4th grade at Lakewood Elementary for 33 years. Their monthly payment on that refinanced loan was $782.19. They had been paying it by automatic withdrawal from their checking account with us since the refinance closed. I know that because I was the one who wrote the automatic withdrawal module in the spring of 2001. Agnes called me on a Tuesday morning in October. She called me at home, not at the branch, because she still had the old member directory from 1994 that listed my kitchen phone, and she didn't trust whoever was answering the phone at the branch anymore. She'd called them 3 times that week. 3 different people had told her 3 different things. One of them had told her the loan was in default. Another had told her she owed $87,400 in back payments. The third had just told her there was a glitch in the new system and not to worry about the letter. The letter was a formal notice of intent to commence foreclosure proceedings on her property. It had come in a plain envelope on credit union letterhead. It told Agnes that the loan she and Paul had taken out in 1974 was 44 months delinquent, that her current principal balance was calculated at $46,200, and that if the arrears were not cured within 30 days, the credit union would initiate legal action under Iowa foreclosure statute. The letter was signed by someone named Keisha Daniels, Senior Systems Administrator. I had never heard of Keisha Daniels in my life. Agnes read me the entire letter over the phone. Then she read me the envelope. Then she read me the small print disclosure on the back that told her she had a right to dispute the notice in writing. And then she did something I'll never forget. She apologized to me. She said, "Howie, I'm sorry to bother you at home. I know you don't work there anymore, but you're the only person I know who knows how that computer works, and I don't want to lose this house." She was trying to protect me from the inconvenience of helping her. The woman whose home was about to be taken by a machine I had spent 28 years building was apologizing for calling me on a Tuesday morning. I told her I'd look into it. I told her I'd call her back by Friday. I told her not to pay anything to anyone and not to sign anything that came in the mail. Then I hung up the phone, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I did the thing I had been refusing to do for 5 months. I went down to the basement. I turned on the server. I'm going to have to go back and explain who I am, because otherwise, this story doesn't land right. I'm going to have to explain what Lakewood Federal Credit Union is, and what it was, and what a loan servicing system actually does, and why a man like Preston Vaughn walks into a building like that one and cannot see any of it. I'm also going to have to explain Ernie Delgado, because Ernie is the reason any of us were there. I'll try to keep it honest, and I'll try to keep it short, although nothing about this story is short, and the dishonesty, when it came, was never on our side. Lakewood Federal Credit Union was chartered on the 2nd of March, 1952, by a group of 11 returned World War II veterans who wanted a place where a farmer could walk in and get a loan on a combine without needing to wear a tie. The founding membership was 94 men and 4 women, all of them from Tama County. The initial capital was $38,000. The first branch was a converted feed store on Maple Street. The first president was a man named Orville Benning, who had come home from the Pacific with one lung and an opinion about what finance could do if it was kept small and local and watched by the people it belonged to. Orville's portrait hung in the lobby from 1952 until the week Preston Vaughn took it down in June of 2025 to put up a print of a CloudCore financial promotional poster. I am still not over that. By the time I walked in the front door in August of 1988, Lakewood FCU had about 9,000 members, 3 branches, and just over $70 million in assets. I was 26 years old. I had dropped out of the University of Iowa after my 3rd year because my father got sick and the family farm needed a hand. I'd been working as a night shift loader at the Marshalltown Freight Depot for 18 months, and my sister Linda told me that Ernie Delgado at the credit union was looking for a teller. I put on a tie I'd borrowed from my brother-in-law, and I walked in at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, and Ernie interviewed me himself in the back office with the door open. He asked me what I thought a credit union was for. I said I thought it was for the people who kept its books on the right side of even, and Ernie laughed and hired me on the spot. I started the following Monday. Ernesto Delgado was the president and CEO of Lakewood FCU for 47 years. He came to Iowa as a boy from the Rio Grande Valley in Texas in 1956. His father had worked picking tomatoes in migrant camps and eventually landed a permanent job at a cannery in Cedar Rapids. Ernie went to Iowa State on a state scholarship, studied business, came back to Tama County because his mother wouldn't leave her church, and started at Lakewood FCU as a loan officer in 1977. He ran the place like a man running a farm. He knew every employee's middle name. He knew the first names of about 2,000 members. He knew which families were one bad harvest away from the edge, and he knew which ones had enough to help their neighbors. He never put on a suit jacket unless he was going to a funeral. He kept a picture of his mother on his desk until the day he went home early on a Tuesday in September of 2024, complained of chest pain, and died in the parking lot of the regional hospital before they could get him onto a bed. Ernie was my boss for 36 of the 37 years I worked there. He was also the reason I became a programmer. In the spring of 1991, the credit union's loan servicing software, which was a licensed package from a company that had been absorbed by a company that had been absorbed by a company, began to fail in a way nobody on the vendor's hotline could explain. We'd post a payment to a member's loan account, and about half the time the balance would update correctly, and about half the time it would double the principal and add an interest charge on the doubled figure. The vendor told us to stop posting payments and wait for a patch. Ernie told me to come into the office on a Saturday. I want you to understand what he did. Ernie had noticed me because I was the teller who stayed late to reconcile my drawer when the system wouldn't cooperate, and I would write little notes to myself on the backs of deposit slips about what the system did wrong. He collected those deposit slips for 8 months without saying anything. That Saturday in 1991, he put about 40 of them in front of me and said, "Howie, do you think you could read the guts of this thing and tell it to stop doing that?" I told him I didn't know anything about computers, and he said neither did anybody else on the vendor's hotline apparently. He made me a cup of coffee, and he handed me the manuals for the system, and he said, "I'm going to sit in the other room and read the paper. Come get me when it's fixed, or when you're hungry, whichever comes first." I fixed it by 6 o'clock that evening. I had to read the system's batch reconciliation routine, which was written in a dialect of COBOL I had to learn from the manual as I went, and I had to find the module that was double posting, and I had to rewrite the part of the routine that decided whether a transaction had already been applied. I wasn't qualified to do any of that. Nobody had told me it was impossible. Ernie had left me alone in a room with a manual and a problem, and he had done it on purpose. On Monday morning, he walked into the teller line and said, "From now on, Howie is also the IT department." And that was how I became a programmer. I took night classes at Kirkwood Community College for 2 years, and then I took a correspondence course in Java in 1998, and I read a lot of manuals on my kitchen table after Lynette went to bed. Lynette was my wife. We got married in the summer of 1989, in the same little Methodist church where her grandfather had been buried. She was a librarian at Lakewood High School. She raised our 2 daughters more than I did, because I spent a lot of nights at the credit union patching things. She didn't complain. She read novels at the table while I read manuals at the other end of the table. She used to say that most couples couldn't spend 6 hours in the same room in silence, and that the fact that we could meant something. I miss her every day. She died of ovarian cancer in the summer of 2019. In the spring of 2002, Ernie and I and the board agreed that the licensed system we'd been patching for 11 years had to be replaced. The vendor had shut down. The documentation we had was incomplete. Every patch I'd written was a patch on a patch on a patch. I told Ernie that if he'd give me 12 months and a small contract with a consulting firm for the parts I couldn't handle alone, I'd write a new loan servicing platform from scratch, custom for us, documented properly, and I'd own it line by line so that the credit union would never be at the mercy of a vendor again. Ernie took it to the board. The board voted yes in May of 2002. I spent the next 14 months building what would become the Lakewood Loan Servicing Platform, internal version 1.0, in a mix of COBOL for the core batch reconciliation routines, RPG for the account posting engine, because it was the dialect the IBM server we had actually ran best, and a small Java front-end layer I added in 2008 when we built the members' online portal. I'm not going to pretend it was elegant. I'm a self-taught small-town programmer, not a Silicon Valley engineer. It was held together with discipline and documentation. But every line of it was written with one principle in mind, which I had learned from Ernie and from Orville Benning's portrait on the wall. The principle was simple. The system exists to tend to the members' homes. Every record is a promise the credit union has made to a family. Every calculation is a test of whether the credit union is keeping its word. A loan servicing system is not a database. It is a book of promises, written in a language the computer can keep without forgetting. I maintained that system for 22 years after I finished writing it. I kept the change documentation in 31 3-ring binders, labeled by year and color-coded by module. I kept the backup source archives on an air-gapped server in my basement, mirrored to 2 external drives that I swapped out every 6 months. This is standard practice for any sole developer maintaining a production system in a regulated industry. It is specifically required by NCUA Part 748, which governs credit union information security and requires retention of IT change documentation for 7 years. My archives went back 28. I kept them out of discipline, not paranoia. Ernie died in the parking lot of the regional hospital on the 10th of September, 2024. I was at the office that day, writing a patch to the amortization module for a change in Iowa usury law. Reggie Bloom, our member services manager, came into my office without knocking and closed the door behind him, and I knew before he said anything. We drove out to the hospital together. Carol Unruh, our board chair, met us in the hallway. Ernie's wife, Guadalupe, was already there. She had a rosary in her hand, and she was not crying. She was just looking at the tile floor like she was trying to remember something. At Ernie's funeral the following Saturday, the pews were full. Farmers who hadn't worn a suit since their father's wedding wore a suit. 4 generations of Lakewood members sat in the Methodist church and sang the hymns Ernie's mother had sung to him in Texas when he was 6. After the service, Carol Unruh told me privately that the board was going to have to conduct a search for a new CEO, and that they were going to do it through a firm in Minneapolis because it was the proper thing to do. I told her I wished her luck. I didn't understand yet what that sentence meant. The search took 4 months. In January of 2025, the board announced the new CEO of Lakewood Federal Credit Union. His name was Preston Vaughn. He was 41 years old. He had a Wharton MBA from 2012. He had spent the first 6 years of his career at Wells Fargo as a strategy analyst, and the following 6 years at Regions Bank in Birmingham as a vice president for something called channel optimization. He had never worked at a credit union. He had never made a member call. He had never written a loan. He was hired because the Minneapolis search firm had convinced half the board that what Lakewood needed was digital transformation, and because Carol Unruh, who had been on our board for 21 years and who trusted me and who had loved Ernie, had been outvoted by the 3 newer board members who had all been put on the board in the last 4 years. After the credit union's assets crossed $300 million, and we became, on paper, a regulated institution of some modest consequence. Preston arrived on the 15th of January. He wore a suit jacket to his first day, and he wore a suit jacket every day after that. On his first Friday, he called an all-staff meeting in the members' community room, which was the big room in the main branch that we used for retirement parties and member educational seminars and the annual Christmas open house. He stood in front of a PowerPoint with the words, "Digital Transformation Initiative," across the top in blue letters, and he spoke for 40 minutes about the cloud and about member experience optimization and about the future of community banking. He used the word stakeholders 11 times. I counted. He said the word members twice. I counted that too. He said he was excited to bring Lakewood into the 21st century, and he said it with a straight face in a building where I had just spent the morning renewing a mortgage for a family whose grandparents had been founding members. When the meeting ended, he walked around and shook hands with everyone. When he got to me, Reggie Bloom introduced me by saying, "This is Howie Neumann. He runs our IT." Preston shook my hand and said, "Oh, great, the back-end guy. I'm going to need to pick your brain about our infrastructure." He smiled while he said it. He said the word infrastructure the way a man says a word he has only read. I should tell you about Preston the way I actually saw him, because I want to be fair. He was not a stupid man. He had real intelligence of a specific kind, the kind that could read a quarterly report and tell you where the margins were soft. He was not a lazy man. He arrived at the office at 7:15 every morning, and he stayed until 6. He was not personally cruel. He held doors. He remembered the name of the woman at the reception desk. He was not, in any ordinary sense of the word, a bad person. He was simply a man who had been trained to look at an institution like ours and see a set of numbers that could be optimized. The members were not invisible to him. He simply had no framework in which to put them. When he looked at Agnes Varley's account, he saw a row in a table. When he looked at Dean Hollister's small business loan, he saw an asset with a risk score. He had not been trained to see anything else, and because he was not lazy, and because he was not stupid, he went to work with terrible efficiency on the thing he had been trained to see. In late February, he met with me for the first time in a formal one-on-one. He asked me to walk him through the loan servicing system's tech stack. I told him what I've told you. I told him it was a custom platform I had written starting in 2002, that the core was in COBOL and RPG running on an IBM iSeries server that had been upgraded 3 times, that the member-facing layer was a Java application written in 2008 and modernized in 2014, that the archives and documentation were complete and current, and that the system handled about 32,000 loan accounts across 3 counties. I told him I had changed documentation going back to 1997 and source archives going back further. I told him the system had never had an unplanned outage of more than 2 hours in its entire history. He listened. He nodded. He asked good questions, the kind a man asks when he is trying to understand something he does not yet understand. And then, at the end, he said something I will remember until I'm in the ground. He said, "Howie, I want to say this with respect, but we cannot run a community banking institution in the 21st century on a system written by one man in Iowa in 2002. I didn't argue with him. I just asked him what he thought we should run it on. He said, I have some relationships I want to explore. We'll talk again. 2 weeks later, he invited a vendor to give a presentation to the board. The vendor was CloudCore Financial. The CEO of CloudCore was a man named Gabriel Torrens. The Chief Revenue Officer was a man named Tyler Brinkman. Tyler Brinkman had been Preston Vaughn's roommate at Wharton in 2011 and 2012. Preston did not mention this fact to the board. I only learned it myself 3 months later when Marlene Okafor told me, but we'll get to her. The CloudCore presentation was 45 minutes of a slideshow with a soundtrack. It promised unified member experiences, cloud-native scalability, real-time fraud analytics, AI-driven credit decisioning, and something called member journey orchestration. It promised to cut our IT operating costs by 42% within 18 months. It promised to migrate our entire legacy loan servicing platform into their cloud platform in a seamless 90-day cutover. It cost $3.1 million upfront and $700,000 a year thereafter. At the end of the presentation, Gabriel Torrens told the board that CloudCore was deeply committed to the credit union mission and that they were currently serving 11 community institutions across the Midwest. I looked them up that night. They had been founded in 2022. They were 3 years old. They had 41 full-time employees. 2 of the 11 community institutions they claimed to be serving were still in onboarding and had not yet cut over to CloudCore's platform. I wrote a memo to the board. I'm going to tell you what was in it, not because I want credit for writing it, but because the memo is part of what saved us later, and because the memo is what got me moved out of my own office. I laid out in 7 pages the technical risks of a 90-day cutover for a 32,000-account loan servicing platform with 2 decades of accumulated member history. I listed the NCUA Part 748 information security requirements and the Part 702 reconciliation reporting requirements that any migration would have to meet. I explained the specific reason I was concerned about CloudCore's import routines, which was that I had asked their implementation lead in a follow-up call whether they had ever migrated a system with loans originated before 2001 that used 2-digit year formats in their origination dates, and the implementation lead had told me, and I quote, "We can handle any date format. That's not a hard problem." Any programmer over the age of 50 reading that sentence will understand why I wrote the memo I wrote. I gave the memo to Carol Unruh. Carol gave it to the board. The board voted in May, 8-3, to approve the CloudCore partnership. Carol voted no. So did a farmer named Wade Kopecki and a retired schoolteacher named Maureen Lutz. The other 8 voted yes. Preston announced the partnership in a press release 2 days later. He did not mention the memo. He did not mention my concerns. He did mention that legacy systems have served Lakewood well, but the future of member experience lives in the cloud. 3 weeks after the board vote, Preston asked me to come into his office. He had taken over Ernie's office by then, but he had redecorated. He had put up a framed print of the Wharton School crest. He had put up a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with the governor of Pennsylvania at some economic forum. He had taken down the picture Ernie had hung of the 1952 founding charter and moved it to a hallway. He sat me down and he told me that the board had decided, with his recommendation, that my role was going to be reframed to better align with our new direction. My new title would be Senior Technology Advisor. My new responsibilities would be advising on legacy system continuity during the migration period. My salary would remain the same. My office would be reassigned to the new CloudCore implementation lead, whose name I was about to meet. I would move into a smaller office at the back of the branch, next to the record storage room. I asked him if this reassignment was a consequence of the memo I had written to the board. He smiled the way he smiled at all-hands meetings and said, "Howie, this has nothing to do with the memo. I just need my implementation team close to the core platform during the cutover." He said it while looking at me with an expression that was trying very hard to look sincere. I'm going to tell you what I did next, because it matters later. I did not argue. I did not file a grievance. I did not call Carol Unruh. I went back to my old office. I packed my personal things into a banker's box. I carried the box to the smaller office at the back of the branch. I opened the box, and I put my framed photo of Lynette on the new desk, and I put my coffee mug, the one my younger daughter Sarah had given me for Father's Day in 2006, next to it. Then I sat down in the new chair, which did not have the same lumbar support as the old one, and I began quietly and methodically copying the entire active production source tree, all the change documentation, all the NCUA 748 compliance binders, and all the monthly reconciliation variance reports from the last 7 years to my personal work drives. Every line of it, every binder. I did this over the course of 11 business days. I did it because 28 years of experience had taught me one thing about vendors and about newly arrived executives, which was that the first thing they break without knowing they have broken it, and the only way to fix it afterward is to have an exact record of what it looked like before. I was not stealing. I want to be very clear about that. I am telling you this on a recording, and I am telling you this in public, and I have told the NCUA the same thing. Every document and every line of code I copied was either my own work product, which I am legally entitled to retain under my employment agreement, or a compliance artifact that I was the designated custodian of under NCUA Part 748, or a document in the public records of the credit union to which every member, including me, was entitled. I did not take any member data. I did not take any personally identifiable information. I did not take any financial records of any individual. I took the machine. I took the blueprints of the machine. I took the inspection logs of the machine. I left the members' data alone. In August of 2025, Preston hired a junior developer named Marlene Okafor. Marlene was 29 years old. She was originally from Atlanta. She had a computer science degree from Georgia Tech. She had worked at CloudCore Financial for a year and a half, and she had been hired by Preston, with Tyler Brinkman's recommendation, to be a bridge engineer during the migration. Her job, on paper, was to help translate my legacy code into specifications CloudCore could implement. On her first day, Preston introduced her to me and asked me to brief her on the environment. I liked Marlene from the first 10 minutes. She was sharp, she asked specific technical questions, and she took notes in a small black notebook with a mechanical pencil. I spent 3 full days walking her through the system, the documentation, the amortization module, the reconciliation routines, the NCUA reporting pipeline. She asked me what the Y2K era origination date handling looked like, and I showed her. I showed her the module I had written in 1999 that handled the 2-digit to 4-digit conversion for pre-2001 loan originations. And I showed her the test suite I had written to validate it. And I showed her the specific edge cases that had given us trouble in the early years. I did not realize then how important that briefing would become. I just remember that Marlene said, in the quiet way she said most things, CloudCore's import routine does not have logic for that. I asked her if she'd brought that up internally. She said, I brought it up twice. I was told we'd handle it in post-migration reconciliation. I remember I looked at her and I said, Marlene, that is not a post-migration problem. That is the entire system breaking on day 1. She said, I know. She closed her notebook and she did not say anything else about it that day. Marlene was fired 4 months later. The official reason was culture fit. The real reason, as I learned when she reached out to me in November, was that she had sent a formal email to Preston in late October with CloudCore's Tyler Brinkman and 2 other CloudCore engineers on copy, explaining that she had identified 7 specific data integrity issues in the migration test runs, one of which was the Y2K Epoch handling, and she was requesting a go/no-go review before cutover. Preston's response, in writing, was to tell her that the migration was on schedule and that flagging non-critical technical concerns at this stage was not aligned with the project's momentum. 2 weeks later, she was let go. She kept every email. She kept every screenshot. She kept the CloudCore dashboard captures that showed the specific variance alerts the system had been flagging internally. I did not know this in August. I did not know any of this until November, when I was already deep into my own investigation and Marlene found my home number through Reggie Bloom. Let me come back to my retirement party, because I have to describe it in full, and I have to do it now, because after the retirement party, the timeline compresses and the story moves very fast. The retirement party was held on the afternoon of Friday, the 19th of September, 2025, in the members' community room of the main Lakewood branch. It was 3 in the afternoon. About 60 people were there. Reggie Bloom was there. Carol Unruh was there. Wade Kopecki and Maureen Lutz were there. 2 of my 3 nieces were there. My older daughter Joanna had driven down from Des Moines that morning. My younger daughter Sarah was stuck in a teacher training in Iowa City and had sent flowers that morning. There were folding chairs in 3 rows and a small podium at the front and a long table with a sheet cake, and behind the podium, on the back wall, there was a banner that said, "Happy Retirement, Howie, we will miss you." The cake, on top, in blue icing, said, "Happy Retirement, Harold." Harold, not Howard, not Howie, Harold. The CloudCore intake form for staff events had been filled out by someone who did not know me and did not bother to check. The bakery had gone off what the form said. Nobody caught it until the cake arrived at the office at 2:30 in the afternoon, and by then it was too late to change it. Reggie saw it first. He came into the back room where I was putting on the suit jacket I had last worn at Ernie's funeral, and he said, "Howie, we have a problem with the cake." I looked at it. I said, "It's fine." He said, "I can run down to the Hy-Vee and get another one." I said, "Reggie, it's fine. Let's just go." I gave a short speech. I thanked Ernie, which was the only part of it that meant anything to me. I thanked the members. I thanked Lynette even though she wasn't there. I did not thank Preston because Preston had not yet spoken. Preston spoke after me. He stood at the podium and he gave a speech about Craftsman and about eras and about the importance of honoring the past while building the future. He used the phrase, "the last of the old guard," and he used the phrase, "a craftsman of an era before the cloud," and he used the phrase, "a bridge to where we are going." He introduced Keisha Daniels as the new Senior Systems Administrator for Lakewood Federal Credit Union. Keisha was 24. She had been at CloudCore Financial for 14 months, her first job out of college. She walked up to the podium and waved and sat back down. Preston then announced to the assembled members and staff and board members that the CloudCore migration cutover was on schedule for the first week of October, and that Lakewood was going to be a flagship institution for 21st century community banking. I watched Keisha Daniels through all of this. I watched her because I noticed something that nobody else in the room seemed to notice, which was that Keisha had a set of office keys clipped to her badge lanyard, and on the brass ring of the keys, I could see the little green plastic tag with the number 14 on it. 14 was the number of my office, the office I had still technically been occupying as Senior Technology Advisor until that morning. Keisha had the keys before the retirement party had even ended. She had them because someone had physically given them to her at least an hour before I gave my speech. I was still employed by Lakewood Federal Credit Union during my own retirement party, and the woman who was replacing me already had the keys to the office I had not yet finished clearing out. I want to tell you about the cake one more time. The cake said, "Happy Retirement, Harold," in blue icing, and about halfway through Preston's speech, I looked over at the cake table, and I saw Carol Unruh standing next to it with her arms folded across her chest. And Carol had been on that board for 21 years, and Carol had known me since my daughters were in grade school, and Carol was looking at that cake with an expression on her face that I had never seen on Carol's face before. It was the expression of a woman who is realizing, in real time, that she has been part of a mistake. She stood there for a long time. She did not eat any cake. Nobody ate much of the cake. Reggie Bloom cut me a corner slice, and I took it home and put it in the refrigerator, and I did not eat it. And after 3 weeks, I threw it in the garbage because it had gone hard and gray. I walked out of the main branch at 4:15. I handed my badge to Reggie. I shook Carol's hand. Joanna drove me home. On the way, she asked me if I was okay. I said I was fine. I said retirement was going to be strange, and she said, yes, it was. She stayed for dinner. I made spaghetti. She left around 8. After she left, I went down to the basement, and I sat at the server I had set up at home in 2014 when I switched my personal archive from external tapes to a proper Synology NAS, and I did not turn it on. I sat there looking at it for about an hour. Then I went upstairs and I went to bed. That was Friday, the 19th of September, 2025. Agnes Varley would call me on Tuesday, the 21st of October. I had 32 days of not doing anything between those two calls. I mostly walked around my backyard and fixed things on the house that had been broken since Lynette died. I was trying to pretend I had retired. The phone call from Agnes ended that pretense, and I don't think I've been the same since. The week after Agnes called me, I went to work. I'm going to use the phrase, went to work, because that is what it felt like. I went down to the basement at 7 in the morning, and I came up for lunch, and I went back down, and I came up for dinner, and I went back down, and Joanna called me at 11 to see if I was okay, and I told her I was working on something. I worked like that for 6 weeks. The first thing I did was cross-reference Agnes's account. I had the full loan servicing database backed up as of September 19th, which was the last business day I had access to the production system. I queried Agnes's account. Her loan balance was $46,200, and her next scheduled payment was $782.19, and she was 0 days delinquent. Her automatic withdrawal was active. Her last payment had been posted on the 1st of September and had cleared normally. Then, I called my daughter Joanna, and I asked her to drive up and buy me a new external hard drive from the Best Buy in Des Moines, because I was going to need to set up a clean room for forensic work, and I did not want to do it on any machine that had ever been connected to my home network during the time I had still been employed. Joanna dropped off the drive on Thursday. I set up a clean Linux environment. I started pulling records. I looked at Agnes's account as it existed in my September 19th snapshot. I needed to see her account as it existed now, in the CloudCore migrated production system. I did not have a valid credential into the production system anymore. I was retired. But I did have something else. I had Marlene Okafor's home phone number. Reggie had slipped it into my coat pocket on the day of the retirement party with a note that said, "She may want to talk," and I had put the note in a drawer and forgotten about it. I went to the drawer. I called Marlene. Marlene picked up on the third ring. I told her who I was. She said she knew who I was. I asked her if she'd be willing to meet me for coffee in Iowa City, halfway between her apartment in Cedar Rapids and my house in Lakewood. She said yes. She said it before I had finished explaining what I wanted. She said, "I've been waiting for this call." We met on a Saturday at a diner on the east side of Iowa City. She brought a backpack. The backpack had a laptop, a bound folder of printed emails, and a USB stick. I have never in my life been handed a gift like what Marlene Okafor handed me in that diner. She had kept everything. Every email she had sent Preston about the migration concerns, every reply, every internal Slack message between CloudCore engineers about the Y2K Epoch handling, every screenshot of the data integrity alerts that had been flagged during test runs, every meeting note from the go/no-go conversations that Preston had overridden. She also had, because she had been the bridge engineer, a complete map of how CloudCore's import routine had handled the Lakewood loan origination dates during the cutover. It was exactly as bad as I had feared in my memo, and exactly as Marlene had flagged in her October email. Loans originated with 2-digit year formats before the year 2001 had been imported, with their first _payment_date field defaulted to Unix Epoch 0, which is midnight on January 1st, 1970. CloudCore's amortization engine, which was a generic off-the-shelf component, looked at those loans and saw that the first _payment_date was 55 years in the past. It calculated that the members were, therefore, 55 years into their loan schedule. For a 30-year mortgage, 55 years in meant the loan should have been paid off 25 years ago. The engine flagged these accounts as severely delinquent and began generating collections notices. The delinquency calculation was automated. No human reviewed the notices before they were sent. That is how Agnes Varley got a foreclosure letter in October. That is how 213 other members got letters too. Every single one of them had taken out a loan from Lakewood FCU before the year 2001. I sat in that diner for 4 hours with Marlene. We went through the evidence together. She walked me through CloudCore's internal architecture. I walked her through my archives. We drew the full picture on a napkin, and I still have the napkin. When we finished, I asked her why she had kept all this. She said, "Because I knew they were going to blame me for flagging it, and I needed a record." I asked her if she wanted me to use it. She said, "I want you to save those members' houses, and I will testify to anything you need me to testify to, and I will put my name on any filing you put my name on." She said this without raising her voice. Marlene Okafor is a quiet person. She is not quiet because she is afraid of anything. She is quiet because she does not waste words. I drove home that night with the USB stick in my shirt pocket. I did not put it in the glove box. I put it in my shirt pocket, and I kept my hand on it for most of the 2-hour drive. When I got home, I copied the contents of the stick to my clean forensic machine. Then I locked the stick in the safe in the basement, where I keep Lynette's wedding ring. Over the next 3 weeks, I built the file. I'm going to tell you what was in the file, because this is the part of the story where the work becomes the weapon. The file, which was a bound 3-ring binder that ended up being 411 pages, contained the following. It contained a cover letter addressed to the National Credit Union Administration, Region 4 Examination Office in Chicago, laying out a complaint under NCUA Part 748, Part 702, and Part 749, specifically alleging that Lakewood Federal Credit Union had executed an information system migration in violation of Part 748 security and change management requirements, that the post-migration reconciliation variance was being systematically misreported as one-time migration noise in violation of Part 702, and that the whistleblower retaliation provisions of Part 749 had been triggered by the termination of Marlene Okafor and the constructive removal of Howard Neumann. It contained a list of 214 Lakewood Federal Credit Union member accounts that had received foreclosure notices or default notices between October 14, 2025 and December 31, 2025, cross-referenced against my September 19 snapshot to show that every single one of those accounts had been current as of the last business day before cutover. It did not contain any personally identifiable information beyond the account numbers and the dates of notice generation. It identified, in a separate appendix, 31 accounts that were already in active foreclosure proceedings, and 7 accounts whose members had suffered credit score damage, confirmed through my outreach to those members. I had called every one of them personally between November and December. It contained the Y2K Epoch Bug analysis. I walked through the specific CloudCore import routine, the specific error in the date parsing logic, the specific downstream effect on the amortization engine, the specific accounts affected, and the specific remediation that would be required to correct it. I included the portion of my 1999 test suite that had been written to handle exactly this class of edge case, which CloudCore had neither received nor requested, which they could have had for free if they had simply asked, and which would have told them this bug was in their code before they ever cut over. It contained Marlene Okafor's emails to Preston Vaughn, in chronological order, from her first internal concern in September to her formal go/no-go request in late October, along with Preston's replies and the Slack messages between CloudCore engineers that showed they had seen the integrity alerts and had internally described them as non-critical and acceptable for cutover. It contained my June 2025 memo to the Lakewood FCU board, along with my transmittal letter to Carol Unruh and Carol's signed receipt to establish the timeline of my own formal warnings. It contained the monthly NCUA Part 702 reconciliation variance reports for October, November, and December 2025. The reports showed a cumulative variance of just over $12 million across the loan servicing platform. CloudCore's team had filed all 3 reports, characterizing the variance as migration transitional noise to be resolved in Q1 2026. In my analysis, I demonstrated that the variance was not transitional and not noise. It was the signal of the Y2K Epoch Bug propagating through the amortization engine. It had been visible in the monthly report as early as the November filing. Anyone with experience reading reconciliation variance patterns would have seen it immediately. Nobody at CloudCore had the experience. It contained a list of my source archive contents, indexed by year, module, and documentation binder, so that the NCUA examiner would know what was available on request. And it contained, at the very end, a single-page letter from me, signed by me, stating that I was willing to testify under oath as to every factual claim in the filing, that I understood the personal legal risks of a wrongful termination retaliation claim under Part 749, and that I was submitting the complaint not for personal relief, but on behalf of the 214 members whose homes were at risk due to the migration failure. I signed the cover letter on a Tuesday morning in early January 2026. I made 3 copies of the entire binder. I mailed 1 copy by certified mail to the NCUA Region 4 office in Chicago. I mailed a 2nd copy by certified mail to the Iowa Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. I kept the 3rd copy in my basement, in the safe, next to the USB stick Marlene had given me. I called Carol Unruh from my kitchen table on the morning I mailed the binders. I told her what I had done. I told her the NCUA would be contacting Lakewood within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and I told her I wanted her to be prepared. Carol was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Howie, I have been waiting for a reason to do something, and you have just given me one." Carol called an emergency board meeting for the following Friday. I did not attend the board meeting. I was no longer an employee. I was a member of the credit union and nothing else. But I had a long conversation with Carol the night before, and I know what happened in the room because Carol told me, and because Y2K told me, and because Reggie Bloom, who was not in the room but who heard the vote from the hallway, told me. Carol opened the meeting by distributing a 1-page summary of the NCUA complaint I had filed. She did not apologize for my complaint. She did not apologize for the board's vote in May. She laid out the facts. She gave everyone in the room 10 minutes to read the summary. Then she asked Preston Vaughn, who was sitting at the head of the table in Ernie's old chair, whether he had any additional information he would like to share with the board before discussion began. Preston said that the NCUA complaint was a baseless retaliation by a disgruntled former employee, that the CloudCore migration was proceeding according to plan, and that the reconciliation variance was transitional and would be cleared by Q1 2026. Carol asked him, in front of the full board, whether he was aware that 214 members had been sent default or foreclosure notices since cutover. Preston said he was aware of some notice generation issues, but that they were being addressed by the CloudCore support team. Carol asked him whether he knew the exact number. Preston did not. Carol read the number off the paper in her hand. 214. She asked whether he knew how many were in active foreclosure proceedings. Preston did not. Carol read the number. 31. She asked whether he knew that Agnes Varley, whose husband Paul had been in the 8th grade class with Ernie Delgado at St. Joseph's Elementary School in Dyersville, Iowa in 1965, had received a letter saying her farmhouse was being taken. Preston said he did not know who Agnes Varley was. Carol nodded slowly. She said, "Preston, I want you to say that sentence again. I want you to say it out loud so the room can hear it." Preston repeated it. He said, "I do not know who Agnes Varley is." Y2K told me that the board voted 9-2 to remove Preston Vaughn and to immediately suspend the CloudCore migration pending a full NCUA supervised review. The 2 votes to retain him came from the 2 newest board members, who had been put on the board in 2022 and 2023 on the recommendation of a management consultant who had also recommended the CEO search firm that had recommended Preston. Carol did not vote on the question of removal because as chair, she only voted to break ties and there was no tie. The motion passed at 4:17 in the afternoon on Friday, February 21, 2026. Preston walked out of the boardroom carrying his framed Wharton certificate in a cardboard box. Reggie Bloom watched him get into his Audi and drive away. Reggie told me that Preston did not look angry. Preston looked confused. Preston still, at the moment he got into that car, did not understand what he had done wrong. The NCUA examination formally opened the following Monday. Wayne Fredrickson, the Region 4 examiner who was assigned the file, called me at home on a Tuesday. We spoke for 90 minutes. I gave him the full technical walkthrough. I gave him Marlene's contact information. I told him that I was available for as many follow-up calls as he needed. He thanked me. He told me that, in his 21 years at NCUA, he had never received a complaint filing that was as organized as the one I had sent. He did not tell me that as flattery. He told me that because he was going to have to rely on it heavily in the coming months, and he wanted me to know that he recognized it. The board offered me a consulting contract the following week. The contract was for 6 months. The terms were that I would supervise the rollback of the CloudCore migration and the reestablishment of the legacy loan servicing platform while the NCUA review was completed and while the board searched for a new CEO. I accepted the contract. I did not accept it for the money. I accepted it because somebody had to undo what had been done, and I was the only person alive who knew how to do it. Over the following 4 months, I walked into the main Lakewood branch every morning at 7:30. I worked out of a room they set up for me in the back of the branch because the CloudCore implementation team still had their equipment in my old office, and I did not want to displace anyone. I worked with Marlene, whom Carol had hired on a separate consulting contract at my recommendation. I worked with Reggie. I worked with 2 young IT staff members CloudCore had left behind, who had transferred over to work directly for us. We stood the legacy system back up from my archives. We ran parallel reconciliations against the CloudCore system for 45 days to confirm the variance was entirely explained by the Y2K Epoch Bug and the downstream amortization corruption. We identified every affected member account. We generated corrected notices and personal apologies that went out over the signature of Carol Unruh as acting president. We called Agnes Varley first. I called her myself. I said, "Agnes, this is Howie Neumann. I told you I'd call you back by Friday. I know it's a little late." She said, "Howie, I knew you'd call. I don't think I ever really worried." I wanted to cry when she said it, and I didn't. I told her everything. I told her loan was current, had always been current, had never been in any danger, and that the credit union was sending her a formal letter of correction and apology that she could frame if she wanted to. She laughed at that. She said, "Howie, I've got enough things on my walls." I said, "Agnes, the credit union would also like to offer you compensation for the stress this has caused you, and if you'd rather take that as a reduction of your outstanding principal, we can do that too." She said, "The credit union is just the members, right? So I'd just be paying myself. Save the money for the others." She was talking about Sheila Pruitt. She was talking about Dean Hollister. She had already heard about them from the women at her church. Sheila Pruitt lost her house. I have to tell you this part. I have to tell you this part because if I don't tell you this part, the ending of this story is a lie. Sheila Pruitt was 37 years old. She was a single mother of 2. She had bought her first house in 2019 after her divorce, and the foreclosure notice she received in October was forwarded to her ex-husband's address by mistake because of a different data integrity issue in the CloudCore system. Sheila did not see the notice. Her ex-husband saw it and used it in a custody filing against her. The house went into formal foreclosure proceedings in November. By the time I got to her account in December, her legal situation had already deteriorated beyond repair. Her ex-husband had temporary custody. The house had been scheduled for auction. Our rollback did not reach her in time. Sheila received financial compensation from the credit union in March of 2026. She received it in a lump sum. She used part of it to rent an apartment in a different county so that she could be closer to the school her older daughter was now attending under the new custody arrangement. Her credit score will eventually recover. Her children's custody arrangement will not be so easily undone. Sheila did not speak to me personally. She did not return my phone calls. I understand why. I would not return my phone calls either if I were her. Dean Hollister had his credit score restored by the end of April. His automotive shop is still operating. He has not, as far as I know, forgiven the credit union, and he has moved most of his deposits to a bank in Marshalltown. Agnes Varley still has her farmhouse. She still pays her mortgage through automatic withdrawal on the 1st of every month. Her balance on the loan, as of the date I am writing this, is $38,711. She has 21 payments left. CloudCore Financial filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in May of 2026. Their application for a federal financial holding company charter, which they had been pursuing through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, was denied in April after the NCUA investigation findings were shared with the OCC. Tyler Brinkman is no longer employed by CloudCore. I am told he has moved to Austin and is working at another startup. Gabriel Torrens, the CEO, is named in a private lawsuit brought by several of CloudCore's other community institution clients. Preston Vaughn has not, to my knowledge, filed any legal response to his removal. He has not, to my knowledge, sought employment at another financial institution. The last I heard, he was consulting for a private equity firm that specializes in buying out failing regional banks. I think that is where Preston Vaughn always belonged, and I am sorry for whichever regional bank goes next. Wayne Fredrickson, the NCUA examiner, sent me the final examination report in a sealed envelope in May. It is 12 pages long. It confirms every factual claim in my original complaint. It recommends a formal regulatory letter to Lakewood Federal Credit Union, required remediation of all affected member accounts, and a civil monetary penalty against CloudCore Financial that has since been assessed at $2.4 million. The report also contains a paragraph, which I will remember for the rest of my life, in which Wayne Fredrickson writes, quote, "The complainant, Howard W. Neumann, is a former employee whose actions in preserving and transmitting the relevant evidence are consistent with the highest standards of whistleblower conduct under 12 CFR 749, and the integrity of his documentation was the single most important factor enabling this examination to reach its findings in a timely manner." End quote. I read that paragraph sitting at my kitchen table, and then I read it again, and then I put the report back in the envelope, and I put the envelope in the safe in the basement next to the USB stick from Marlene and Lynette's wedding ring. I am writing this on a Tuesday morning in June of 2026. My consulting contract ended last week. Carol Unruh has been elected permanent acting president by the board while they conduct a proper search for a new CEO, and she has told me privately that she has no intention of retiring until she has hired the right person. Marlene Okafor has accepted a permanent position as the senior systems manager at Lakewood Federal Credit Union. She has moved to Cedar Rapids. She comes out to Lakewood 3 days a week and works from her apartment the other 2. She has my home phone number and she uses it. Joanna called me this morning. She asked me how I was doing. I told her I was fine. I told her that the sun was coming through the kitchen window at the angle Lynette used to like, and I told her I was going to spend the afternoon in the garden because the garden needs me and nothing in my basement needs me anymore. I never hung the framed certificate of appreciation that the credit union had given me at the retirement party. It is still in the closet in the spare bedroom, in the cardboard box I carried out of the branch on September 19th. I do not think I am going to hang it. I do not think it matters whether I hang it or not. The misspelled sheet cake is still the clearest image I have from any of this. Not Preston's face at the board meeting, not Wayne Fredrickson's 12-page report, not Agnes Varley's voice on the phone telling me she knew I'd call. The sheet cake with "Happy Retirement Harold" in blue icing, sitting on a folding table in the members' community room of the credit union I had spent 28 years keeping on the right side of even. I can close my eyes and see that cake exactly. I can see the shape of the H and the shape of the L. I can see the small piped flower in the upper left corner where the bakery had added a decoration to cover a thin spot in the frosting. I can see Carol Unruh standing next to the cake with her arms folded across her chest, realizing something. When Orville Benning came home from the Pacific in 1946 with one lung, he told the other veterans who eventually founded Lakewood Federal Credit Union that the point of finance was to keep small things small and local and watched by the people who had the most to lose. I believe that is still what the credit union is for. I believe that 28 years of writing COBOL and RPG in a basement in Iowa was, on the whole, a reasonable way to spend a working life. I believe that the building on Maple Street is still worth saving, and that it was worth the fight, and that Agnes Varley's farmhouse was worth every hour I spent in the basement pulling the archives apart. I believe Lynette would say I had done what I had to do. I do not believe Preston Vaughn understood any of this at any point. I am not sure he ever will. I am not sure it is my problem anymore. I took the boxes out of my basement last Saturday. I put the source code archives in cold storage with Marlene's new team at Lakewood FCU. I cleared the table in the basement. I left the server running because habits are hard and because Agnes Varley knows my home number. That is the story. That is how a farm country credit union that had survived every recession since 1952 nearly got destroyed by a Wharton MBA from Philadelphia and a 3-year-old startup in Austin, and how a retired programmer who was too stubborn to throw away his binders managed to save most of it. 3 homes could not be saved. 211 could. I do not know whether that is a victory. I know it is what happened. I know it is what I owed to the members. I know it is what Ernie Delgado would have done if Ernie Delgado had still been alive to do it. I also know that my retirement party sheet cake said, "Happy Retirement, Harold." And I know that nothing Preston Vaughn ever said in the building came closer to the truth about him than that misspelled cake, because at the end of the day, Preston Vaughn never knew my name, and he never knew Agnes Varley's name, and he never knew the name of the credit union he was in charge of. And those 3 facts together are what I have to say on the subject, and I have nothing else I need to say.